The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse creaked open, sending a faint echo across the vast chamber. It was a room built to command respect-arched ceilings, tall windows casting long strips of sunlight across polished wooden floors, and the constant murmur of reporters scribbling notes in anticipation of the day's proceedings. For weeks, the trial had captured national attention, drawing spectators from far beyond the small town where the events had unfolded. Seats in the gallery filled quickly each morning, the crowd shifting between whispers and sharp gasps as new evidence surfaced. But today, the tension in the air felt different, tighter, heavier, as if everyone inside sensed that something monumental was about to happen. At the front of the room sat Judge Harrison, a man known for his stern demeanor and unshakable command of the law. His gavel had silenced dozens of unruly hearings over the years, but even he could not entirely mask the curiosity in his eyes that morning. On his left, the prosecutor's team huddled over their papers, while across the aisle, the defense attorney leaned back smugly in his chair, arms crossed with an air of rehearsed confidence. And then there was Rex. The German shepherd sat, poised beside his handler near the witness stand, his thick coat shining under the fluorescent lights. A service dog decorated for his work with the local police department, Rex was trained for search and rescue, protection, and courtroom comfort. Yet even in such a formal setting, his presence commanded attention. His steady brown eyes scanned the room, alert but calm, as though he could sense the unspoken tension crackling around him. To the jurors, he was just a dog, a piece of background. Reassurance. But for reasons none of them yet understood, his role that day would prove greater than anyone imagined. The bailiff's voice cut through the whispers. All rise. As the judge entered, everyone stood, the shuffle of bodies filling the silence. Once seated again, the room braced for the day's most anticipated moment, the arrival of the youngest witness. The doors at the back opened again, and all eyes turned. She was tiny, almost swallowed by the vastness of the chamber. A little girl, no more than 3, walked slowly beside a court aide. She wore a pale yellow dress, its hem brushing her knees, and held a worn-out stuffed rabbit in one small hand. Her hair was gathered in uneven pigtails, as though someone had hurried to get her ready that morning. To the gallery, she looked impossibly fragile, like porcelain that might shatter at the slightest touch. The courtroom fell silent as she approached, the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing down on her. Even the most seasoned reporters, pens poised over their notepads, hesitated, their throats tightening at the sight. She was far too young to sit in a courtroom, far too young to bear the burden of truth that adults had failed to carry. The defense attorney smirked, leaning toward his co-counsel with a dismissive whisper. This is their big witness? A toddler? Desperate. But across the aisle, the prosecutor's expression was different. Hope flickered behind his glasses. He knew the risks of bringing her in, knew the defense would pounce on her age and question her credibility. Yet he also knew she carried a truth no one else could deliver. Guided gently to the stand, the little girl climbed into the oversized chair. Her legs dangled freely, nowhere near reaching the floor. She hugged her stuffed rabbit tightly, eyes darting nervously around the intimidating space. The judge softened his expression slightly, recognizing the gravity of asking a child to sit under oath. "Sweetheart," the prosecutor said softly, crouching to her level. "You're safe here, okay? You don't have to be afraid." She nodded faintly, though her lips trembled. She shifted her gaze from the prosecutor to the rows of strangers staring at her, then to the defendant sitting across the room. Her body stiffened. Her grip on the rabbit tightened, its fabric fraying under her small fingers. And then her eyes landed on Rex. For the first time since entering, she stopped fidgeting. Her gaze locked on the German shepherd, who sat tall and still, his ears perked slightly. A flicker of recognition, Something deep, unspoken passed across her face. Slowly, her hand lifted from the rabbit and extended outward, pointing directly at Rex. The reaction was immediate. The courtroom, already tense, went utterly silent. No papers rustled, no pens scratched against notepads. Even the defense attorney, mid-whisper, stopped short. All eyes followed her small finger toward the dog, who had suddenly become the center of attention. The judge leaned forward, brows raised. "Do you know this dog?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. The girl didn't speak at first. Her hand stayed steady, her wide eyes fixed on Rex, as if the rest of the world had vanished. The German shepherd tilted his head slightly, then wagged his tail once, slowly, as though confirming what everyone else could only guess. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, sensing the moment would be newsworthy. Jurors exchanged uncertain glances. The prosecutor watched closely, his heart pounding. This was it, the moment he had prayed for, though he couldn't have predicted how it would unfold. The defense attorney rolled his eyes theatrically. "She's 3 years old," he muttered under his breath, though the uncertainty creeping into his voice betrayed him. Still, the little girl said nothing. Her lips trembled, her tiny shoulders rising and falling, as though she were summoning all the courage her small frame could carry. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. The judge, recognizing her struggle, softened his tone. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can tell us." The silence stretched. The courtroom leaned in. And then, in a voice no louder than a whisper, but clear enough to reach every corner of the chamber, the little girl spoke. 2 words. Just 2. Words that would ripple through the room, that would stun the judge himself, and that would set the course of the trial on a path no one could have foreseen. Her tiny voice cracked with emotion as she said it, but the meaning was unmistakable. And in that instant, the case transformed. The air inside the courtroom felt charged, as though the building itself had taken a breath and was holding it. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the little girl perched on the oversized witness chair. Her hand still pointed toward Rex, the decorated police dog who sat so calmly at the front, tail thumping once against the polished floor. The child's voice, tiny and fragile, had just whispered 2 words. "My hero." Though soft, the words carried farther than a shout. A silence that followed seemed to magnify them, echoing through every corner of the chamber. The gallery gasped. Some leaned forward, others pressed hands to their mouths, stunned by the child's declaration. A reporter dropped her pen, the sharp clatter startling against the stillness. Even Judge Harrison, a man not easily rattled, blinked hard and leaned back in his chair, as though the sheer weight of those 2 words had pushed him there. On the prosecution side, a current of energy surged. The lead attorney's pulse quickened. He knew they had risked much by bringing in such a young witness. And yet, in that moment, he realized the gamble might be paying off. The child had spoken not with rehearsed lines, but with something stronger, conviction. Across the aisle, however, the defense attorney scoffed loudly, pushing back his chair with exaggerated disbelief. "Your Honor," he said, throwing his hands into the air, "this is absurd. We're expected to believe the testimony of a toddler?" His voice dripped with mockery. 3 years old, barely able to string a sentence together, and now she's declaring dogs as heroes? This is a circus. The judge lifted a hand, silencing him with a single glare. "Sit down, Mr. Lewis." His tone was sharp, brooking no argument. The defense attorney obeyed, though not without muttering under his breath. The prosecutor seized the moment. He rose, buttoning his jacket as he moved closer to the stand, lowering himself into a crouch so his eyes met the girl's. His voice was gentle, almost a whisper. "Sweetheart," he said, Can you tell us why you called Rex your hero? The little girl shifted, hugging her stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. Her small legs swung nervously beneath the chair, not quite reaching the ground. She glanced toward the rows of strangers, her lower lip trembling, then back to Rex, who sat alert and steady, watching her as though he understood. Her throat worked in a swallow, and then, with a shaky breath, she spoke. Because he saved me. The words landed like a gavel strike. The gallery erupted in hushed murmurs. Jurors exchanged startled looks, their eyes wide. Judge Harrison's expression grew heavy, the lines on his face deepening. And faithful Rex rose to his paws and padded forward a few steps, stopping at the base of the witness stand. His handler reached to restrain him, but the judge lifted a hand again. "Let him," he said quietly. The German shepherd sat down directly beneath the child's dangling legs, his calm eyes looking up at her with a devotion that required no explanation. The girl leaned forward slightly, her tiny fingers brushing his fur. Her breathing slowed, steadied, as if his presence anchored her against the tide of fear, threatening to pull her under. The defense attorney leapt to his feet again. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The dog is influencing her testimony." The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Enough." His voice carried the authority of decades on the bench. "This court will allow the child the comfort of the dog. Proceed." The defense attorney sat, seething, but the damage had been done. The jury was transfixed, their attention locked on the unlikely pair, the tiny girl and the towering German shepherd who seemed to embody her courage. The prosecutor took a slow breath, careful not to rush the fragile moment. "Sweetheart," he said again, his tone measured, "can you tell us what you remember? Just in your own words. You don't have to be afraid anymore." The child hesitated. For a long moment, the room was so quiet that the ticking of the courtroom clock seemed deafening. She clutched her stuffed rabbit until her knuckles turned white. Then, as if drawing strength from the steady warmth of Rex at her feet, she nodded. "I was in the dark," she whispered. "It was scary. I cried and cried, but nobody came. Then, he came." She reached down, stroking Rex's ear. With trembling fingers. "He barked really loud. He found me." The prosecutor's chest tightened. It was exactly what the police reports had described, but hearing it from the child herself made the truth undeniable. Gasps rippled again through the gallery. A juror dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Reporters scribbled frantically, capturing every word. The defense attorney jumped up once more, desperation leaking into his voice. "She's just a child." She could have been coached, but Judge Harrison's glare cut him off mid-sentence. "Sit down, Mr. Lewis. If you interrupt this testimony again, I will hold you in contempt." The defense attorney sank back into his chair, lips pressed tight, knowing he was losing control. The prosecutor pressed gently on. "Sweetheart, do you remember what happened after Rex found you?" The little girl's eyes welled with tears. She clutched her rabbit tightly, her voice breaking. "The bad man was gone. But Rex stayed. He wouldn't leave me. He made me safe." At that, Rex shifted closer, resting his head gently against the edge of the witness stand. The girl smiled faintly through her tears and placed her tiny hand on his head, fingers tangling in his thick fur. The courtroom collectively exhaled, moved by the raw purity of the moment. It was unpolished, unfiltered testimony from a child too young to fabricate the depth of such emotion. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, his usually stoic face softened by what he had witnessed. "Let the record show," he said slowly, "that the witness identified the police canine as her rescuer. And though the trial had many hours yet to unfold, everyone present knew the scales had shifted. The defense still had arguments, loopholes, technicalities, But none of that could erase the image burned into the minds of the jury. A child pointing to a dog and calling him her hero. For the first time in weeks, the prosecutor allowed himself the faintest glimmer of hope. And as the court adjourned for recess, reporters raced to telephones, jurors whispered among themselves, and the gallery buzzed with disbelief. One truth lingered above all else. The smallest voice in the room had just spoken the loudest truth, and it had stunned them all. The echoes of the child's whisper, "My hero," still lingered in the air when the judge called the courtroom back into session. Reporters had sprinted to telephones during recess, their hurried voices spilling the words to news desks across the country. Within hours, headlines would flood televisions and newspapers. Toddler calls police dog my hero in courtroom standoff. But inside the chamber, the gravity was heavier than any headline could capture. The little girl sat once more in the witness chair, her stuffed rabbit still clutched tightly in her lap. She no longer looked toward the defendant. Her gaze remained fixed on Rex, who sat like a statue at the foot of her chair. His calm presence steadied her trembling shoulders. When the judge motioned for the proceedings to resume, the prosecutor rose carefully, aware that every move now mattered. He approached slowly, crouching to eye level again. His voice was steady, but softer than before, as though he feared breaking the fragile thread of courage the girl had found. "You said Rex is your hero," he began. "Can you tell us what you mean by that?" The girl hesitated. The courtroom was vast and intimidating, but the warmth of Rex's eyes encouraged her. She wiped her small nose with the back of her hand, then took a deep breath. "He came when I was alone," she whispered. "He didn't let the bad man keep me." A ripple of emotion moved across the jury. One juror pressed her palm to her chest, while another leaned forward, as though drawn closer by invisible strings. The prosecutor nodded gently. "You remember Rex saving you?" he asked. The little girl nodded. "Yes, he barked so loud. He was brave. He found me." At that moment, Rex stirred and inched closer, resting his chin on the edge of the witness stand. The girl's hand reached out instinctively, her fingers threading through his thick fur. The sight melted whatever resistance remained in the gallery. Some wept openly, others simply stared, transfixed by the raw innocence in front of them. The defense attorney, however, was seething. His face was flushed, and he rose abruptly, his voice louder than necessary. "Objection, Your Honor. This testimony is unreliable. The witness is 3 years old. She could be repeating something." She overheard. "This is hearsay." Judge Harrison's gavel cracked down, the sound sharp as thunder. "Overruled. The jury will determine the weight of the testimony. Sit down, Mr. Lewis." The defense attorney sat reluctantly, but his scowl betrayed his frustration. He knew the moment had taken hold of the room, in a way no legal argument could undo. The prosecutor, sensing the defense's weakness, pressed on. "Sweetheart, can you tell us how you felt when Rex came?" The girl blinked, her small voice faltering. "I wasn't scared anymore," she said. "When he came, I knew I could go home." The words landed with the weight of truth, carrying the innocence of a child too young to fabricate such conviction. The judge leaned forward, his fingers steepled under his chin. For the first time in years, he felt his eyes burn moisture, threatening to break the composure he had carefully built across decades on the bench. He quickly cleared his throat, masking the moment. But he wasn't alone. A bailiff shifted uncomfortably, dabbing at his eyes. Even one of the sternest jurors wiped a tear discreetly. The defense attorney, desperate to regain control, stood. Again, "Your Honor, may I cross-examine?" "Proceed," Judge Harrison said, though his tone carried warning. Mr. Lewis approached the child, his towering figure casting a shadow across the stand. His voice took on a forced gentleness, but the undercurrent of calculation was clear. "Hello there," he began. You said this dog saved you, didn't you? The girl nodded. And you love dogs, don't you? Lots of children your age do. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward Rex. Yes. Maybe someone told you to say that, His smile was thin, almost mocking. Maybe your mommy or daddy told you to say Rex is your hero? The girl's brow furrowed, confusion crossing her face. No, she said firmly, shaking her head. Are you sure? He pressed. Sometimes people say things to make others happy. Maybe you just want to make the nice man over there. He gestured to the prosecutor. Smile. Her lip trembled, but Rex lifted his head higher, his warm breath brushing her arm. Her small hand pressed against his fur for reassurance. Then, with unexpected steadiness, she said, No one told me. He saved me. I remember. The firmness of her voice, small though it was, cracked through the attorney's veneer of control. Nothing further, he muttered, retreating quickly to his seat. The damage was done. The prosecutor turned back to the jury, his voice resonant. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard from the only witness who truly lived that night. Her words are not rehearsed. They are not fabricated. They come from a child who remembers fear and remembers who brought her out of it. The jury's faces told the story. His words weren't needed. They had already been moved by something deeper than argument. As the judge dismissed the girl from the stand, she climbed down, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. She hesitated halfway across the floor, then turned and ran not to her aide, not to her mother in the gallery, but to Rex. She flung her little arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. The German shepherd stood patiently, tail wagging, softly, as though he'd been waiting for that very embrace. The courtroom erupted in whispers, tears, and the frantic scratching of reporters' pens. The image was undeniable. A child clinging to the dog she had called her hero, a bond that transcended law and spoke directly to the heart. Judge Harrison let the moment linger before striking his gavel once. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a man who had just witnessed something unforgettable. As people filed out, the buzz of conversation filled the air. Some spoke of strategy, others of evidence, but most whispered about the two words. That had silenced them all. My hero. It was no longer just a child's testimony. It was a truth that had pierced through walls of legal jargon and skepticism. And though the trial was far from over, one thing had become clear, the smallest. Witness had given the prosecution its most powerful weapon, two words that no jury could unhear. When the gavel struck to reconvene the following morning, anticipation radiated through the courtroom like a storm waiting to break. People had lined up outside before sunrise, desperate for a seat inside. Reporters clutched recorders and notebooks, as though they were weapons, hoping to capture the next revelation. The nation's attention had turned squarely on this case, and especially on the child who had stunned the court with two fragile words, my hero. But what she said next promised to shake the case even further. The little girl returned, walking, hand in hand with a court aide. She looked even smaller beneath the weight of so many stares, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her arm. Yet when her eyes found Rex waiting near the stand, she managed a shy smile. The dog's tail wagged once in recognition, his calm presence a silent reassurance. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses and nodded toward the prosecutor. You may continue. The prosecutor rose, his voice measured but warm. Sweetheart, yesterday you said Rex is your hero. Can you tell us why? The girl swallowed hard. Her gaze darted nervously to the defendant sitting only yards away. The man's cold eyes bore into her, and her shoulders hunched instinctively. But Rex shifted closer, settling at the base of the stand. His presence steadied her trembling frame. She tightened her grip on the rabbit, then spoke in a voice so soft the gallery leaned forward to catch the words. because he saved me. The room froze. The air thickened as though those 3 words had locked everyone in place. The prosecutor crouched to her level. Can you tell us what you mean by that? Her eyes glistened with tears, as memories surfaced, memories no child should carry. I was in a dark room, she whispered. It smelled bad. I was cold. I cried a lot, but nobody came. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor's throat tightened, but he let her continue at her own pace. I thought maybe Mommy forgot me. Or maybe I wasn't going home. Her small hands twisted the rabbit's ears, a nervous habit that made her words cut deeper. Then I heard barking. Loud barking. It scared the bad man. He ran. Then the door broke and Rex came. Gasps filled the courtroom. The prosecutor nodded encouragingly. And what did Rex do? Her face softened, a fragile smile breaking through. He licked my hand. He stayed with me until the other people came. I wasn't alone anymore. The jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some blinked away tears. Others clenched their jaws as the image took hold. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Your Honor, I object. This is hearsay mixed with imagination. A witness is 3 years old. Judge Harrison cut him off with a thunderous gavel strike. Sit down, Mr. Lewis. The court will hear her testimony. The defense attorney gritted his teeth, but obeyed. The prosecutor turned back, speaking gently. Sweetheart, when Rex found you, how did you feel? Her answer came without hesitation. Safe. She looked at Rex with pure adoration. I wasn't scared anymore. He made the dark go away. The gallery erupted into muffled sobs. Even hardened reporters dabbed at their eyes. The judge's expression softened as he watched the small child stroking the German shepherd's fur. He had presided over decades of trials, yet rarely had. He witnessed testimony so pure, so undeniably human. The prosecutor glanced at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this child has no reason to lie. She has no agenda, no motive, no knowledge of legal strategy. What she told you is what she lived. Rex found her. Rex protected her. And Rex is the reason she sits here with us today. The defense attorney jumped again, desperation cracking. His voice. This is pure emotion. You can't convict a man on a child's fairy tale. The judge slammed the gavel once more. Control yourself, Mr. Lewis. The jury will weigh the evidence. You will have your turn. The little girl flinched at the raised voices. Immediately, Rex nudged her hand with his nose, grounding her in the chaos. She giggled faintly, a sound so out of place in the courtroom that it silenced everyone. That laugh, innocent, fragile, fleeting, reminded the room exactly what had been at stake. The prosecutor, realizing the moment's power, gently said, "Thank you, sweetheart. You've been very brave." The girl smiled weakly, then climbed down from the chair. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around Rex's neck, burying her face in his fur. The German shepherd stood tall, steady as a stone, allowing her tiny frame to cling to him as though he were the only safe place in the world. The courtroom erupted again in whispers, reporters scribbling furiously, jurors unable to hide their emotion. The image was seared into their minds. The rescued child holding tightly to the dog she had just called her savior. Judge Harrison allowed the moment to linger before speaking. His voice was quiet but firm. Let the record reflect that the witness identified the police canine as her rescuer. This court will reconvene tomorrow for cross-examination. The gavel fell, but no one moved. People remained in their seats, whispering, crying, staring at the pair locked in an embrace at the center of the storm. The defendant shifted in his chair, his once confident smirk gone. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as the realization settled in. The testimony of a 3-year-old and the loyalty of a dog. were unraveling his carefully constructed defense. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and news anchors spoke breathlessly into microphones. But inside, as the crowd slowly dispersed, one truth echoed louder than any headline. The words of a child had stripped away all pretense. And those words, "He saved me," would not be forgotten. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed like a hive under threat. Word had spread across the country about the 3-year-old girl who had told the world, through trembling lips, that Rex had saved her. Newspapers ran the story on their front pages. Networks replayed clips of her words, and hashtags flooded social media. Everyone wanted to know what would happen when the defense finally had its turn. By 8 a.m., the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder in the gallery. Jurors shifted uncomfortably under the weight of so many stares. And even Judge Harrison, seasoned by decades on the bench, looked more solemn than usual. The girl had captivated hearts, but the trial still demanded evidence, and today would test how much her testimony could withstand. The child sat near the front, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her hair brushed neatly into tiny braids. Rex lay at her feet, steady as always, his amber eyes locked on the defendant. He seemed to sense the tension thickening in the air. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. The gavel struck, and the crowd's murmur silenced instantly. The defense attorney, Mr. Lewis, rose with deliberate calm, adjusting his tie as if readying himself for battle. He had a reputation for being ruthless, for tearing apart witnesses with surgical precision. But today, the witness was 3 years old. The jury watched him with suspicion, prepared to turn on him the moment he went too far. Judge Harrison's gaze was firm. "Mr. Lewis, you may proceed, but tread carefully." Lewis gave a shallow bow. "Of course, Your Honor." He approached the stand, crouching to meet the child's eye level. His smile was tight, his words coated with artificial sweetness. "Hello, sweetheart. Do you remember me?" The girl shook her head. Her small voice carried across the hushed courtroom. "No," Lewis chuckled softly. "That's all right. I'm just going to ask you a few questions, okay?" She nodded timidly. Rex's ears flicked, as if he understood that trouble was near. "Yesterday," Lewis began, pacing. Slowly, "you said Rex saved you? Do you remember that?" "Yes." Her grip tightened on her rabbit. "And you said you were in a dark room?" "Yes." "Sweetheart, sometimes when we dream, it feels real, doesn't it? Like when you dream about monsters under your bed?" The little girl tilted her head, confused. "It wasn't a dream. I was awake." A ripple of approval swept through the gallery. The prosecutor smiled faintly. Lewis's eyes narrowed, but he pressed on. "But you're very little. 3 years old. Sometimes children get things mixed up, don't they? Maybe you saw Rex later and thought he was there with you?" Her brow furrowed, the innocence in her face giving way to determination far beyond her years. She pointed at Rex. "No, he was there. He found me." The jurors shifted, watching her closely. Her conviction rang like a bell no cross-examination could dull. Lewis's smile faltered. He leaned in closer. "Sweetheart, did anyone tell you to say that? Maybe your mommy? Or the nice policeman?" Her lower lip trembled. For a moment, it seemed his tactics might overwhelm her. The courtroom held its breath. But then Rex stood, moving to the edge of the stand, his steady presence grounding her. She placed her tiny hand on his head and drew courage from his warmth. "No one told me," she said firmly. "I remember." Gasps broke out in the gallery. The defense attorney paled. Judge Harrison rapped his gavel. "Order!" Lewis straightened, trying to regain control. "Children sometimes imagine heroes, don't they? Like princesses or superheroes. Isn't Rex just like that for you?" Her eyes blazed with the simplicity of truth. Rex is real. He saved me. The bad man ran away because of him. The room erupted again. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jurors exchanged glances heavy with meaning, and the defendant's jaw clenched until his face turned red. "Mr. Lewis," Judge Harrison warned, "you're close to badgering the witness." Lewis swallowed his frustration. He knew the child's words had already carved themselves into the jurors' hearts. He tried one last angle. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what the bad man looked like?" The girl froze. Her eyes darted toward the defendant. The silence stretched unbearably. The prosecutor almost rose to object, but then the girl's tiny finger lifted, trembling, and pointed directly at the man sitting at the defense table. It was him. The courtroom exploded. People gasped, shouted, and even cried out. The defendant leapt to his feet, shouting, "She's lying! She's a child. She doesn't know." Bailiffs rushed forward, restraining him as chaos threatened to unravel the room. The girl burst into tears, clinging to Rex, who stood like a shield between her and the man she had just identified. Judge Harrison's gavel pounded. Silence. Silence in the court. His voice roared above the noise, restoring a fragile order. The jury sat in stunned silence, their faces pale. What they had just witnessed was more than testimony. It was recognition, raw and unfiltered, from the only surviving victim who could speak. Lewis slumped into his chair, his strategy in ruins. He knew no amount of technical argument could erase the sight of a trembling child, pointing to the man accused of stealing her safety. The prosecutor rose quietly. "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge looked down at the child, his stern expression softened by the weight of her bravery. "You've done very well, young lady. You may step down." She climbed off the chair and ran straight into her mother's waiting arms. Rex followed, pressing his head against her shoulder protectively, as though swearing silently that no harm would ever reach her again. The gallery watched in reverent silence. For once, no one scribbled notes, no one whispered commentary. They all knew they had just witnessed a moment that would echo far beyond this courtroom. And as the gavel fell to adjourn, one truth was undeniable. The case was no longer about evidence alone. It was about the power of innocence, loyalty, and a child's unshakable memory of who had saved her from the darkness. After the courtroom adjourned for recess, the atmosphere inside the small county courthouse remained electric. Conversations buzzed through the corridors like live wires. Reporters crowded the hallways, replaying the child's words into their recorders, knowing they had captured something extraordinary. "She called him her hero," one whispered. "She said Rex saved her," another added. In hushed tones, everyone agreed that the day had shifted the trajectory of the trial. Meanwhile, the jury remained in the chamber under the supervision of the bailiffs. They had been witness to a rare spectacle, a child speaking truth with clarity and innocence that cut through even the most seasoned courtroom defenses. Their faces reflected disbelief, emotion, and a dawning realization. The trial's outcome now hung on a bond between a 3-year-old and a police dog. The prosecutor gathered his files and notes as the courtroom reconvened. He knew the defense would attempt to sow doubt, but the testimony was vivid, authentic, and corroborated by tangible evidence. All that remained was to connect the dots. Judge Harrison called the court to order. "We will proceed," he said, voice steady. His eyes, however, betrayed a hint of awe at the events of the day. The prosecutor stood, addressing the jury with measured confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed yesterday and today is more than emotion. It is fact. Our witness identified the police K-9 Rex as the one who rescued her from a dangerous situation. Now, we will examine the evidence that supports her testimony. He turned to a table where a stack of folders lay. One by one, he pulled out documents, photographs, and digital records. The jurors leaned forward in their seats. The courtroom felt tense, almost sacred, as if time itself had slowed to allow the truth to settle. "Here," he said, holding up a GPS tracking report, "is Rex's route on the night of the rescue. You can see his path through the streets, leading directly to the location where our witness was held." Officers were following his lead every step of the way. The jurors examined the map, eyes widening as the clear, calculated path unfolded before them. Every twist, every turn, perfectly aligned with the child's account. Next, the prosecutor displayed a series of photographs taken by the officers upon entering the scene. The images showed the dim, cold room, objects scattered in disarray, and a frightened little girl huddled in a corner. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft hum of the projector. The little girl, watching from the side, clutched her rabbit but did not avert her gaze. She nodded faintly, her tiny hands trembling as the room absorbed the truth she had lived. Officer statements confirm this, the prosecutor continued, flipping through typed affidavits. Every officer at the scene corroborates her account. They saw Rex leading them, and they witnessed him protect the child until she was safely brought out. Even the defense attorney, seated stiffly in his chair, could not hide his growing unease. He shuffled papers, muttered under his breath, and tried to find a way to challenge the mounting evidence, but the facts were overwhelming. The judge spoke up. "The jury may take note of the clear alignment between the witness's testimony and the documented evidence." "Proceed." The prosecutor nodded, carefully laying out each piece of supporting evidence. Security camera footage showed officers entering the building following the direction of Rex. Audio records captured barking and commands given in real time. Medical reports confirmed the child had minor injuries consistent with the situation she described. Every detail matched her testimony precisely. Jurors exchanged glances, some rubbing their eyes in disbelief. The narrative was undeniable. Child's words, "He saved me," were no longer mere testimony. They were proof, corroborated by concrete evidence. At that moment, Rex shifted, rising from his place beside the stand. He padded forward just a few steps, gazing up at the girl, tail wagging slowly. She reached down, holding out her small hand. He pressed his head gently into it, a silent acknowledgement that she was safe, and that together they had delivered truth to the courtroom. The prosecutor allowed the moment to linger, letting the bond between child and dog speak louder than any legal argument could. The defense attorney, finally standing, attempted one last desperate objection. "Your Honor, the child's testimony cannot be the sole basis for conviction." Judge Harrison interrupted sharply. "Mr. Lewis, the court recognizes the child's testimony is supported by verifiable evidence. The jury will determine the weight of all presented facts." The courtroom fell silent again. Even the gallery seemed to hold its breath, aware that the scales of justice were tilting in favor of truth. The prosecutor then turned to the jury. "Please, review all this evidence carefully. Consider her words, her courage, and the alignment. With every officer report, every photograph, every record. This is not a story concocted by a child. This is a lived experience, brought into the courtroom by someone who survived and by a police dog who acted heroically." The jurors nodded, some scribbling notes, others sitting rigidly in their seats. There was a shared recognition. The narrative of rescue and bravery, once intangible, had now been cemented by undeniable evidence. The defendant shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the weight of reality pressing down. His smirk had disappeared. His confident posture now looked forced. Even without words, his realization was clear. The combination of a child's memory and a dog's documented actions left him without defense. Rex, sensing the tension, rose fully onto his paws and circled slightly, his eyes scanning the courtroom. The little girl's gaze followed him, and she smiled faintly. The dog's presence was more than comfort. It was a statement in itself, a living testament to her story. The judge finally spoke, breaking the tension. The court will reconvene for closing arguments tomorrow. Today's testimony and evidence will be reviewed by the jury. Dismissed. As the gallery slowly filed out, whispers filled the hall. Everyone spoke of the child's bravery, the dog's loyalty, and the astonishing alignment of testimony and evidence. Cameras flashed, capturing her small hand resting on Rex's head, a scene that would become iconic in the coverage of the trial. Outside the courtroom, crowds gathered, their conversations buzzing with emotion. News crews recorded live segments, reporters replaying the child's words to cameras that would beam them into homes nationwide. "My hero," she had said. And indeed, the dog had become a hero, not just to her, but to everyone witnessing the moment. Back inside, the jurors conferred briefly, their notes filled with the details of the child's account and the corroborating evidence. They knew the path ahead, a verdict that could not ignore the bravery, truth, and undeniable reality presented in the courtroom. For the little girl, the trial had been terrifying, but she had been protected, anchored, and validated by the unwavering presence of Rex. The courtroom had seen more than a child's memory. They had witnessed courage incarnate, guided by instinct, loyalty, and the unspoken bond between a girl and her rescuer. And as the doors closed behind the departing spectators, one thought remained in every mind. Truth can come in many forms, but sometimes the purest and most compelling comes from the heart of a child and the courage of a dog. The courtroom was silent as the jury returned from deliberations, their footsteps heavy against the polished floor. Outside, cameras flashed relentlessly. Reporters whispered into microphones, and the nation waited, collectively holding its breath. Within the chamber, every person present understood the stakes. The testimony of a 3-year-old and her heroic police dog had shifted the energy of the trial, and now the question loomed. Would the jury recognize what they had witnessed as truth? The little girl sat clutching her stuffed rabbit, her small hands twisting the frayed fabric nervously. She had watched the defense flounder, seen her own testimony backed by overwhelming evidence, and yet she was only beginning to understand the gravity of what had happened. Rex sat beside her, a silent guardian, his amber eyes steady and watchful. He had been there for every word she spoke, every step she took. He had been her shield, her anchor, and now he seemed to sense that the moment of reckoning was near. Judge Harrison rose and adjusted his glasses. His voice carried the weight of authority, but beneath it was a rare softness, an acknowledgement of the extraordinary nature of what had transpired. "Will the jury please rise?" he called. They did, filing into their seats with expressions unreadable but tense. The prosecutor stood, straightening his notes, though he barely needed them now. The child's testimony, combined with the corroborating evidence, had set the stage. All that remained was for the jury to articulate what they had already witnessed. The judge continued, "Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" Foreman Davis, a tall man with graying hair and a face etched in thought, nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." A hush fell over the courtroom. Every eye was fixed on the foreman. Reporters poised their recorders, jurors on edge, the defendant's family holding their breath, and even the gallery seemed to lean in as if drawn by an invisible force. Judge Harrison's hand hovered over his gavel. "Please state the verdict." Davis cleared his throat. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all charges." The words struck the room like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted. Some whispered. Some exclaimed. The little girl clutched Rex tightly, her wide eyes shimmering with disbelief and relief. Rex pressed his head gently against her shoulder, wagging his tail once, as though to acknowledge the truth had finally been recognized. The defendant froze, his face pale, jaw slack. The confident smirk that had been his armor throughout the trial vanished completely. For the first time, he understood the consequences of his actions. The court, the jurors, and the world outside were united in the recognition of the harm he had caused. Judge Harrison's gavel came down sharply, restoring order. The verdict is recorded. The defendant will remain in custody until sentencing. As officers moved to escort the man from the courtroom, the gallery erupted into whispers of disbelief and praise. Reporters jostled for position, capturing every moment, the child, the dog, and the solemnity of the judgment. The prosecutor stepped forward, bowing slightly. He caught the little girl's eye and smiled. "You were very brave," he said softly. The girl hugged Rex tightly, whispering into his fur. "We did it. We made it safe." The courtroom. Staff, jury members, and even the judge allowed themselves a moment to absorb the scene. It was rare, in decades of practice, to witness a child's courage so directly influence justice. The courtroom had not merely observed a trial, it had witnessed heroism and truth in its purest forms. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, cheering and clapping as the news spread. Social media was ablaze with posts about the child, Rex, and the verdict. Video clips of her pointing to the dog and calling him my hero were shared thousands of times within minutes. People commented not just on the story itself, but on the extraordinary bond between human and animal, and the courage that had prevailed in a room dominated by adults. Back inside, the little girl stood on the steps of the witness stand one last time, Rex by her side. Her mother came forward, tears in her eyes, and hugged her tightly. "You were amazing," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." The girl looked down at Rex, who nudged her hand with his nose. "He's my hero," she said again, softly but firmly. "He saved me." The judge nodded from his bench, his expression thoughtful. "Court is adjourned," he declared. The defendant was led away, officers maintaining a firm grip as he protested, but no one in the courtroom paid him much attention. The focus had shifted entirely to the small child and the dog who had transformed the course of justice. As they left the courtroom, the girl's mother whispered, "Thank you, Rex. You kept her safe." Rex licked her hand once, his large, gentle eyes meeting hers. In that silent exchange, the bond between them seemed unbreakable. He had not only protected her physically, but had also guided the court to the truth. For the jury, the day's events would be unforgettable. They had not only listened to evidence, but had been witness to courage, loyalty, and innocence in its most profound form. In decades of experience, none would likely see a case where the smallest witness and the quietest hero had such a monumental impact. Reporters filed their stories late into the evening, each recounting the courtroom drama with the same awe. A 3-year-old's testimony, the heroic police dog, and the final resounding verdict. Citizens across the nation shared the videos, discussed the child's bravery, and celebrated Rex, who had become an icon of courage and devotion. Inside the courthouse, the child finally relaxed, sitting on a bench beside her mother, while Rex lay obediently at her feet. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "We did it, Rex. We made it safe." And as the sun set outside the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors, one truth became undeniable. The bravery of a child and the loyalty of a dog had not only unveiled the truth, they had reshaped justice itself. In the quiet moments that followed, as staff prepared to lock the courtroom for the evening, Judge Harrison looked thoughtfully at Rex. He had presided over countless cases, but few moments in his career could compare to the purity of what he had just witnessed. It was a lesson in courage, a reminder of innocence, and a testament to the extraordinary ways in which truth could manifest. And for the little girl, it was a story she would carry for the rest of her life, a story of fear, survival, and the unbreakable bond with a hero in fur, whose steadfast presence had turned a terrifying ordeal into a story of hope and justice. A final day of the trial dawned clear and bright, sunlight spilling through the tall courthouse windows, illuminating the polished floors and wooden benches. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, but tinged with anticipation. Everyone knew the verdict had been delivered, yet today marked the ceremonial closure, the final moments of reflection and recognition for the courage that had carried the truth through the courtroom. The little girl entered the courtroom, holding her mother's hand, her stuffed rabbit tucked securely under her arm. Rex padded beside them, calm and majestic, his presence commanding respect without a single word. Reporters crowded the aisles, cameras clicking, capturing the pair who had captured the hearts of a nation. Judge Harrison, sitting behind his bench with his gavel resting silently, called the room to order. We gathered today not only to close this trial, but also to recognize the courage and heroism that brought clarity and truth to this court. He paused, glancing down at the child and then at Rex. The courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. In all my years on the bench, he continued, I have presided over cases of great consequence, but rarely have I witnessed the extraordinary bond between innocence and loyalty that we have seen here. The child's mother squeezed her hand gently. The little girl looked up at the judge, wide-eyed, unsure of what was expected, yet comforted by the steady gaze of her faithful companion. Rex nudged her hand, reminding her silently that he was there and that she had nothing to fear. The prosecutor stepped forward, voice gentle but proud. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to acknowledge the bravery of our youngest witness. Her testimony, honest and clear, guided this court to the truth. And I must also recognize the exceptional actions of Canine Rex, whose training, loyalty, and courage assured the safety of a child in peril. Applause rippled through the gallery, some clapping softly, others quietly sobbing. The defense attorney, seated with an air of resignation, avoided eye contact, fully aware that this was no longer about legal maneuvering, but about human truth and heroism. The judge nodded. Let it be known, he said firmly, that the court officially commends the bravery of the witness, as well as the extraordinary actions of K9. Rex. Their courage has not only saved a life, but also reinforced the very principles of justice we uphold in this chamber. A bailiff stepped forward with a certificate of recognition, which the judge presented to the little girl. Her tiny hands trembled as she received it, glancing at Rex as if to ask, Do we deserve this? The dog sat patiently beside her, tail swishing gently, his steady gaze answering, Yes, we do. Reporters captured the moment, cameras flashing, recording a tableau that would later grace newspapers, television screens, and online media around the world. A 3-year-old girl hugging a police dog, a certificate of heroism in her hand, and a courtroom moved to its core by innocence, courage, and truth. The jury members, who had witnessed the drama unfold, quietly whispered among themselves. Many confessed later that they had been emotionally impacted by the child's bravery, the undeniable proof of her experience, and the steadfast loyalty of Rex. It was a verdict, yes, but also a lesson in humanity, compassion, and courage beyond years. After the formal recognition, the little girl was allowed to pet Rex freely, her laughter soft but genuine. She whispered into his fur, You're my hero forever. The dog's eyes softened, and he leaned into her embrace. The simplicity of the moment spoke volumes, an unbreakable bond, forged through fear, trust, and ultimate rescue. Outside the courthouse, the crowd that had gathered erupted into cheers and applause as the duo emerged. News helicopters hovered, broadcasting live footage of the small girl, her mother, and the hero dog who had captivated the nation. Citizens waved, shouted congratulations, and some wept openly, moved by a story so pure, transcended headlines. In the days that followed, Canine Rex received widespread recognition. He was awarded medals, praised in public ceremonies, and honored in local and national press. The little girl, though shy, became an emblem of bravery and resilience. Interviews were arranged with care, always keeping her comfort in mind, and her story inspired thousands across the country. For the family, life slowly began to return to normal. But the memory of that day of fear, rescue, and ultimate justice would remain forever etched in their hearts. The little girl learned that courage isn't about size or age. It's about standing firm in the face of fear and recognizing those who protect and guide us. Even Judge Harrison reflected on the trial long after it ended. In decades on the bench, he had presided over countless cases, yet few had left such a profound imprint on his soul. He often recounted to colleagues the extraordinary impact of a child's testimony and the role of a courageous police dog in ensuring justice. It was a story of innocence prevailing, of heroism witnessed firsthand, and of a courtroom forever transformed by the purest of truths. Rex, now a household name, continued his duties with pride, always returning to his little companion with the same loyalty that had carried them through the trial. The bond between them grew stronger with each day, a living testament to the power of trust, bravery, and love. And for the little girl, life became a tapestry of hope and gratitude. Though she had faced unimaginable fear, she now knew that courage could be found in the most unlikely places: a brave dog, a steadfast heart, and a courtroom that listened. In time, the story of that trial spread far beyond local news. It became a symbol of resilience, the extraordinary capacity of children to witness truth, and the profound heroism of animals trained to protect and serve. Schools, civic organizations, and law enforcement agencies shared the tale, ensuring that the legacy of that 3-year-old girl and Canine Rex would endure for generations. And as the sun set over the courthouse on the final day, casting warm, golden light across the stone steps, the little girl and Rex paused together, their hands and paws entwined in silent acknowledgement. The trial was over. Justice had been served, and the hero who had guided them through darkness silent, strong, unwavering stood beside the one he had saved, a living reminder that bravery comes in many forms, and that sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. The courtroom was empty, the echoes of the gavel long gone, but the story remained, etched into the hearts of all who witnessed it. A story of fear turned into courage, danger turned into safety, and a bond between a child and a dog that would never be forgotten. And as the little girl whispered one final time, gently resting her hand on Rex's head, she said with certainty, "Thank you, my hero." Rex's tail wagged once. No words were needed. The truth had been told, courage had been honored, and justice, guided by the tiniest of witnesses and the bravest of dogs, had prevailed.